A billionaire sits in his private club about to take his first spoonful of soup, when suddenly a homeless boy bursts in shouting, "Stop! Don't eat that!" At first everyone laughs until a shocking truth is revealed. What this boy uncovered not only saved a billionaire's life but also changed his own future forever. "Stop!
Don't eat that!"
The cry cut through the clinking of glasses and soft jazz music like a thunderclap. Conversations halted, forks froze mid-air, and every head in the grand restaurant turned toward the source of the desperate voice. There, at the edge of the dining hall, stood a boy no older than 12. His hair was matted, his shirt 2 sizes too big and torn at the collar, and his bare feet left faint dusty prints on the polished marble floor. His small frame shook as though even standing upright took every ounce of strength he had, yet his wide eyes burned with urgency, locked onto the plate of steaming soup that sat before the wealthiest man in the room, Jonathan Reed. Jonathan was no ordinary guest. A billionaire with a reputation for icy composure and unshakable authority, he was used to rooms falling silent when he entered. People rarely dared interrupt him, let alone in his own exclusive club where only the most powerful dined. His life was one of perfect order where chaos had no place, and yet, this ragged boy had pierced the room with chaos in a single shout. Waiters gasped, rushing forward with stiff expressions, ready to drag the child out before he caused more embarrassment. The murmurs of the elite diners rose like a tide. "How did he even get in here?" whispered one woman draped in diamonds. "Security should be fired," muttered another man glaring at the staff. But Jonathan did not move. His fork mid-air hovered just above the bowl, his sharp gaze fixed on the trembling boy. There was something different in that voice, not mischief, not hunger, but desperation. It wasn't the cry of someone looking for attention. It was the cry of someone trying to save a life. Jonathan's eyes narrowed slightly, his mind working quickly. Most would dismiss such a scene as nonsense, but instinct told him to pause. He set the fork down, leaned back in his chair, and raised one commanding hand. The waiters froze instantly, their hands still gripping the boy's thin arms. "Let him speak," Jonathan said, his voice calm yet carrying the weight of authority that silenced the entire hall. And for the first time in his young life, the homeless boy realized someone was actually willing to listen. The boy swallowed hard, his thin chest heaving with every breath. His small voice cracked, but the urgency in it sliced through the silence. "Please, don't eat that soup. It's poisoned." For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then the dining hall erupted with shocked gasps. Silverware clattered onto fine china. Ladies covered their mouths, wide-eyed, while men leaned forward, whispering furiously. Jonathan's security team immediately shifted, hands twitching toward their earpieces, ready to pull the boy away or neutralize any threat. Jonathan, however, did not flinch. His steely eyes dropped to the bowl before him, steam curling lazily from the golden broth. Slowly, his gaze lifted back to the boy. His voice was calm, almost too calm. "Poisoned?" he echoed, though his brow tightened ever so slightly. "And how would you know that?" The boy's lips trembled, his dirty fingers twisting the hem of his oversized shirt. His eyes brimmed with tears, but he forced the words out. "Because I saw them. The chef. He dropped something, a little bottle, into it. I was outside looking for food in the trash. I saw everything through the kitchen window. I swear I did." A stunned hush spread across the room. A few wealthy diners let out nervous chuckles, dismissing it as the fantasy of a hungry street urchin. "Ridiculous," muttered one man under his breath. "The nerve of this child," scoffed a woman in pearls. Yet Jonathan wasn't laughing. There was something raw in the boy's tone. No hint of manipulation, only fear. And fear was not easy to fake. Jonathan lowered his spoon onto the tablecloth, the faint clink echoing in the tense silence. "Test it," he commanded, his voice cold but firm. At once, security swept the bowl away. Within minutes, a food inspector, rushed in thanks to Jonathan's immense influence, ran his tests under the watchful eyes of the entire hall. When the results came back, the verdict was chilling. "The soup contains a lethal dose of poison," the inspector announced gravely. Gasps rippled again, louder this time. Utter disbelief filled the air. Someone had just tried to assassinate Jonathan Reed. His jaw tightened, the mask of composure slipping into a hardened expression. But then, as his eyes settled once more on the trembling boy, they softened. "What's your name, son?" he asked quietly. The boy blinked, his voice barely more than a whisper. Ethan. And with that single word, a new chapter in both of their lives began. The discovery sent shockwaves through the exclusive club. Guests whispered in panic, unable to believe that such a refined sanctuary of wealth and privilege had nearly become the stage for a murder. Within hours, Jonathan's personal investigators were mobilized, digging into every detail of the incident. What they uncovered was more chilling than anyone had imagined. The poisoning wasn't a random act. It had been carefully orchestrated by one of Jonathan's closest business rivals, a man who shook his hand in boardrooms, toasted with him at galas, and smiled while secretly plotting his downfall. Driven by greed and envy, the rival had devised the perfect plan: take Jonathan out quietly without a trace, and seize control of his empire. Jonathan could have been dead within minutes if not for a boy most people wouldn't even look at twice. The realization weighed heavily on him. As the police handled the betrayal and locked away the conspirators, Jonathan's mind kept circling back to one haunting thought. Ethan. Why had a homeless child been standing outside his restaurant that night? Why was he so thin, so ragged, so broken, and yet so astonishingly brave? A child abandoned by society had done what none of his polished advisors or paid guards had managed to do: save his life. The following day, Jonathan summoned Ethan not to interrogate him, but simply to understand. When the boy arrived, cleaned only slightly but still fragile, Jonathan saw past the dirt-streaked face. He saw determination. He saw truth. "Tell me about yourself," Jonathan said, his tone softer than anyone in his office had heard in years. Ethan hesitated at first, his eyes darting nervously around the luxurious office, but eventually, his story spilled out. His parents had died tragically in an accident when he was only 6. With no relatives willing to take him in, he had slipped through the cracks of the system. He survived by digging through garbage bins for scraps, sleeping in abandoned buildings, and hiding from bullies who preyed on the weak. As the boy spoke, Jonathan sat in silence. Outwardly, he was calm. Inwardly, something stirred. He was a billionaire, surrounded by marble floors and golden cutlery, yet here was a child who had nothing, and still risked everything to save a stranger. Jonathan realized, for the first time in years, that wealth meant nothing if it couldn't change a life like Ethan's. Days turned into weeks, and Jonathan found that he could no longer ignore the boy who had saved his life. At first, he had offered Ethan the basics: clean clothes, warm meals, and a safe bed to sleep in. But the more time he spent around the boy, the more he realized that Ethan was not just another child in need. He carried himself with quiet courage, surprising honesty, and instincts sharper than most adults Jonathan knew. Soon, Ethan became a quiet presence in Jonathan's world. The billionaire would find him curled up in the corner of his grand library, devouring children's books as though each page was treasure. At lunch meetings, Jonathan sometimes invited Ethan to sit nearby, simply observing. Yet occasionally, the boy would break his silence with a comment so piercingly true that even Jonathan's top advisors were left speechless. Intrigued, Jonathan began inviting Ethan into his office for conversations. While other children his age dreamed about toys or games, Ethan spoke about survival. He spoke about the kids he knew on the streets who went hungry every night, about the unfairness he saw in the world, and about the small acts of kindness that gave him hope. He even dared to point out flaws in Jonathan's own charity programs grown men had signed off on without question. Jonathan listened, fascinated. This was no ordinary boy. This was a mind sharpened by hardship, a soul unbroken despite the cruelest circumstances. One evening, as the city lights glittered outside his office window, Jonathan leaned back in his chair and asked the question that had lingered in his heart. "Why did you warn me that day, Ethan? You could have stayed quiet. No one would have blamed you." The boy lowered his head, fiddling with his hands. His voice was soft but steady. "Because I lost my parents to bad people who didn't care about life. I couldn't watch someone else die in front of me, even if you were a stranger. Life is life, no matter who it belongs to." Jonathan's throat tightened. He had dined with kings, argued with billionaires, and sat across from politicians, yet never had words struck him so deeply. In that moment, he realized something extraordinary. This child, with nothing in his pockets, had a heart richer than many millionaires he had ever known. News of the homeless boy who saved a billionaire spread across the city like wildfire. Within hours, headlines blazed across newspapers and television screens. Street child saves tycoon from poisoning. Hero in rags stops assassination. Reporters swarmed the gates of Jonathan's estate, eager to capture a glimpse of the unlikely hero. But Jonathan refused to let the media circus consume the boy. He shielded Ethan from the flashing cameras, instructing his staff to keep journalists at bay. To Jonathan, Ethan was not a spectacle. He was a child who had already endured more than enough. Still, the world wanted answers. And so, on a bright morning beneath the gaze of dozens of cameras, Jonathan Reed stepped onto a podium with Ethan standing nervously at his side. The boy's clean clothes and neatly combed hair made him almost unrecognizable from the fragile figure who had once burst into the dining hall. Yet his wide eyes still carried the innocence and courage that had changed everything. Jonathan rested a reassuring hand on the boy's shoulder and spoke firmly into the microphone. "This young man saved my life, not just with his words, but with his courage. While others sat in comfort, he stood in truth. From today forward, he will never be homeless again. I will sponsor his education, his future, and I will personally ensure he has every opportunity to succeed." The crowd erupted in applause. Cameras flashed furiously, capturing the billionaire's declaration. Ethan, overwhelmed, clutched Jonathan's hand as tears streamed down his cheeks. For the first time in years, he felt safe. He felt seen. Jonathan's announcement was more than charity. It was transformation. For the billionaire, what began as a brush with death had ended as a lesson that shook him to his core. True wealth was not measured in stocks, mansions, or influence. It was measured in kindness, in bravery, in the lives we choose to touch and change. And for Ethan, the boy who once scavenged trash to survive, this was the beginning of a new chapter. He walked into a future not of despair but of hope, armed with the knowledge that his courage had mattered. He would never forget the night he shouted, "Don't eat that," a cry that not only saved a billionaire's life but in the end saved his own. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more powerful and inspiring stories. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you never miss the next one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.